The air in the grand synaptic chamber of the Cathar Imperium was thick, not with the recycled humidity of countless breathing cycles, but with the suffocating weight of history's imminent end. It was a space designed for eternity, with soaring crystalline arches that drank the faint light of the distant, protective star, and a floor of polished obsidian, mirroring the vast, unblinking eyes of the assembled High Counselors. But tonight the eternity felt fragile, cracked by the omnipresent dread of the Krill hegemony's unrelenting, logical advance. The synaptic throne, occupied by the venerable Chancellor Catrell, seemed less a seat of power and more a pedestal for a martyr awaiting the pyre. The Chancellor, his carapace shimmering with faint, exhausted bioluminescence, held a silence that was itself a declaration of defeat, a silence that had consumed the Imperial Guard's most effective defense fleets in the last standard cycle. The murmurs that finally broke the stillness were not of strategy or defiance, but of philosophical resignation. Counselor Vex, the archtactician, his vocalization nodes trembling with a barely suppressed tremor, leaned forward from his elevated, brass-inlaid station. He spoke not to the Chancellor, but to the void, his voice a low, grating resonance that carried the exhaustion of 1,000 failed simulations. "We have exhausted the calculus, Catrell. Every permutation of defensive positioning, every theoretical engagement profile, every strategic sacrifice, it all yields the same terminal coefficient. The Krill do not fight with passion, they fight with mathematics, and the mathematics, Chancellor, are simply no longer in our favor. The core worlds are not a fortress. They are merely the last variable in an equation that has already been solved by a superior intellect devoid of mercy." His headplates, usually held in arrogant rigidity, drooped, a profound expression of Cathar despair. A sharp, almost physical counterimpulse emanated from the opposing side of the chamber, where the sector governors sat. Counselor Lyra, whose territories had borne the brunt of the initial, shattering assaults, rose with a desperate, sharp energy. Her voice, high-pitched and laced with the metallic tang of unspent fury, cut through the synaptic gloom. "Mathematics is a tool, Vex, not a god, and we are not yet reduced to variables. There remains the matter of the contingency writ, the desperate gambit sanctioned by the Grand Collegium, the appeal to the outer rim, the unblooded. It is unorthodox, yes, perhaps humiliating, but it is not zero." She paused, her segmented optic nerves focusing with pointed intensity on the Chancellor. "Catrell, the writ was dispatched. We require an update on the species-designated Terran. Have the primitives even acknowledged the gravity of the stellar-scale conflict that threatens to consume them along with us? Or are they still squabbling over the surface of their insignificant blue-green sphere, unaware of the celestial fire that is about to scorch their existence from the archives?" A ripple of aristocratic dismissal passed through the assembled ranks. The Terrans, the humans, a newly discovered, barely spacefaring species, a tertiary observation target designated for minimal engagement due to their volatile, chaotic internal politics and their bafflingly inefficient approach to interstellar resource management. They were, in the collective Cathar view, an evolutionary curiosity, a species still grappling with fundamental self-governance, whose maximal military capacity was less than a single, mid-tier Cathar defense platform. The very notion of appealing to them was a desperate, bureaucratic absurdity, a checkbox formality required by the ancient Cathar charter before total surrender could be contemplated. They thought no one would come. They expected silence, or perhaps a polite, confused refusal couched in overly emotional language, certainly not a genuine reply to an SOS of such existential magnitude. Chancellor Catrell finally stirred, the movement deliberate, heavy like the shifting of tectonic plates. His voice, when it came, was a low-frequency rumble that vibrated through the chamber's crystal foundation, commanding absolute stillness. The Terran response was received 18 local cycles ago. A collective intake of breath, a subtle shift in the body language of hundreds of Cathar officials, indicated the sheer shock of any response. It was brief, non-standard. It was not routed through their designated diplomatic channels, but through a unique, high-security, multi-spectrum quantum entanglement signature, bypassing all established interstellar communication protocols and the Krill interdiction net entirely. He paused, allowing the sheer technological implication of that feat, a feat the Imperium itself could barely manage to settle into the collective consciousness. The message contained only 3 translated words and 1 designation. T. His silence returned, heavier now, pregnant with a new, terrifying uncertainty. Counselor Vex, the arch-tactician, his skepticism momentarily overridden by pure intrigue, whispered, "And what were these words, Chancellor? A plea for clarification? A demand for payment? A declaration of neutrality?" Catrell's great ocular lenses narrowed, focusing on an invisible point beyond the chamber's ceiling, perhaps the approaching darkness of the Krill void. The words, Counselor, were, "We are aware, we understand," and the designation was for a single vessel, inbound to the designated rendezvous point at maximal warp signature, defying all standard safety margins. The designation was the vanguard of unforeseen logic. The revelation detonated in the chamber, an ideological rather than a physical explosion. A single vessel, not a fleet, not a task force, not an expeditionary group, a lone ship, dispatched by a species deemed incapable of unified strategic thought, traversing the most perilous quadrant of the galaxy, defying the known limits of propulsion, to answer a plea for help against the greatest military power the known stellar expanse had ever faced. Lyra's faceplates flushed with a mixture of hope and renewed, aggressive skepticism. A single vessel? This is a jest, Chancellor, a typical Terran dramatic flourish. They send a scout, perhaps, to verify the claim, or a ceremonial diplomatic barge, a symbol of their chaotic, performative political impulse. They simply do not possess the capacity to understand the scale of a conflict that involves the annihilation of star systems. "The Krill mathematics," Catrell countered, his voice steadying, "predict the arrival of this single Terran vessel at the rendezvous point outside the Cathar quarantine zone in precisely 1.5 standard cycles. And their projection of its velocity and energy signature, which they have updated 4 times in the last 10 local rotations, is one of deep, palpable concern. The Krill, Counselor, have devoted a significant, uncharacteristic defensive perimeter to this one solitary inbound trajectory. They are dedicating resources to interdict one ship that, by your logic, should be dismissed as an irrelevance." He stared directly at Lyra, his resolve cold and implacable. "The Krill hegemony does not commit error. If they are afraid of a single vessel, it is because that vessel represents an anomaly they cannot categorize, a variable they cannot solve. We will meet with the Terrans. We will receive the vanguard of unforeseen logic, and we will attempt to comprehend the singular arrogance or the profound, hidden capacity that mandates such an action." The journey to the rendezvous point was itself a testament to the Cathar Imperium's decay. The flagship, the Ascension of Stars, an enormous vessel designed to project sovereign authority across entire sectors, moved with the weary, lumbering gait of an ancient beast, its escort depleted, its primary armament banks shadowed by the loss of energy reserves. The destination was a desolate, lightless nebula on the fringe of the Imperium's territory, a strategic staging ground that the Krill had mysteriously avoided, a dark, silent space between the known and the void. It was here in the cold, gravitational silence that the Cathar awaited the Terran anomaly. The tension on the bridge of the Ascension was a physical entity, clinging to the metallic bulkheads, silencing the customary chatter of the tactical crew. Admiral Rylax, a seasoned Cathar commander whose ocular stalks bore the permanent strain of 1,000 battles, stood rigid at his command station, his internal chronometer ticking down the final moments to the predicted arrival. He had spent his entire adult life studying naval strategy, the deployment of grand fleets, the physics of large-scale engagement. The concept of a single ship altering the course of a galactic war was a philosophical affront, an insult to the memory of the millions of Cathar lives lost. He had read the Terran file, unpredictable, driven by irrational impulses like hope and art, possessing a baffling tendency toward self-destruction, yet capable of sudden, terrifying bursts of technical genius. The entire profile was a contradiction, an illogical nightmare. "External sensor analysis," Rylax commanded, his voice a tight rasp. "Give me the moment of transition. I want the energy spike, the temporal distortion, the signature of the Terran propulsion system, all of it. Do not rely on automated threat assessment." The navigation officer, a young Cathar named Teth, whose faceplates were pale with a mixture of terror and awe, responded instantly. "Admiral, confirmed temporal signature disruption, 1.8 cycles out. Wait, the disruption is minimal, almost negligible. Admiral, the warp pin signature is clean. There is no residual exotic radiation, no gravitational shunting, no perceptible distortion of the quantum field." His voice rose in genuine confusion. "It's arriving as if the intervening light years simply did not exist. The energy required for such a clean transition should be catastrophic, should destabilize the entire stellar neighborhood." A moment later, a silent, almost casual shift in the deep black of the nebula resolved into a distinct, three-dimensional form. It did not roar into reality, it simply was. The Terran vessel, the vanguard of unforeseen logic, was instantly visible on the main tactical view screen. It was not the sleek, aggressive arrowhead design favored by the Krill, nor the elaborate, multi-layered architecture of the Cathar. It was simple, almost brutally functional. A long, slender ellipse, matte black, devoid of visible weapon emplacements, its surface absorbing the light like a deep, philosophical shadow. It was immense, certainly larger than any scout vessel, but possessed a profound lack of aggressive ornamentation. It looked less like a warship and more like an instrument, an advanced tool designed for a purpose the Cathar could not yet fathom. Admiral Rylax, his professional skepticism momentarily shattered, could only mutter, "By the great architect!" It is silent. It broadcasts no active sensor sweep, no navigational beacon, no IFF code, not even residual atmospheric discharge. It is a ghost. The silence continued for several long, agonizing Cathar moments, the two civilizations floating in mutual observation. Then, the silence was broken by a single, focused transmission. It was not a chaotic burst of human data, nor a desperate attempt to match Cathar linguistic metrics, but a calm, perfectly modulated signal sent directly on the Imperial diplomatic channel, encoded with a cryptographic key that had been obsolete for 300 standard cycles, a key only a deep archival scholar of the Imperium would possess. The voice that emerged from the bridge speakers was deep, level, and utterly without inflection or strain, the voice of a professional who was not in a hurry, nor afraid, nor surprised. It was the sound of complete, assured authority. "This is Captain Eva Rostova, commanding the vanguard of unforeseen logic of the United Terran Stellar Mandate, to the Cathar Imperium. We have received your writ of contingency. We are here not to fight for you, but to enact a resolution. We require immediate, direct access to the full Krill tactical data archives and your most sensitive projections regarding their core logical strategic vulnerabilities. Time is not infinite. Please advise reception of this transmission." The sheer, staggering calm of the communication was a psychological weapon more potent than any plasma torpedo. It was the calmness of a physician approaching a patient in critical distress, a professional detachment that implied complete mastery of the situation. Rylax, momentarily stunned, recovered his professional composure through sheer force of will. "Open a secure, direct diplomatic conduit to the Terran vessel. Teth, prepare the transfer protocol for the Krill data, all security clearances waived. We will bring the Terran captain directly to the synaptic chamber. Do not attempt any unauthorized sensor sweep. We do not wish to provoke this instrument." The atmosphere in the synaptic chamber, already heavy with despair and uncertainty, became glacial with anticipation when Captain Eva Rostova, the single Terran representative, finally entered. She was escorted not by a phalanx of Terran guards, but by a lone, tall, silent Terran security officer who moved with an unnerving, almost fluid economy of motion, his gaze fixed on nothing specific, yet encompassing everything. Captain Rostova herself was not physically imposing. She wore a simple, charcoal-gray uniform devoid of any military insignia or elaborate rank structure. Her face was calm, her eyes deep and observant, carrying a profound stillness that seemed to draw all the ambient anxiety into itself, neutralizing it. She did not display any of the nervousness or chaotic energy that the Cathar xenologists had predicted based on their historical analysis of Terran political and cultural profiles. She was an anchor of absolute, unwavering tranquility in a storm of galactic collapse. Chancellor Catrell, despite his fatigue, managed to project an aura of imperial authority, his voice once again booming through the chamber. "Captain Rostova of the Terran Mandate, we acknowledge your arrival and the singular nature of your mission. We are the High Council of the Cathar Imperium, the governing body of a stellar entity on the verge of extinction. We have presented you with the existential reality of the Krill hegemony. We must ask, what authority does a single vessel, from a species yet to fully master the rudimentary complexities of sustained interstellar conflict, possess to offer a resolution to a war that has consumed the grandest fleets and the most seasoned strategists of our combined histories?" Rostova stopped in, the exact center of the chamber, under the apex of the crystalline dome. She did not look up at the soaring arches, nor around at the multitude of expectant, skeptical Cathar faces. Her gaze was directed solely at Chancellor Catrell, a look that was neither confrontational nor submissive, but purely analytical. When she spoke, Her voice was low, yet effortlessly projected by a small, subtle device embedded in her collar. It was the voice of pure, distilled logic. Chancellor Catrell, with respect, your assessment of our capacity is based on historical data that is, by its nature, incomplete. You judge us by our internal political struggles, our cultural inconsistencies, our relative youth in the galactic context. This is a common error. We are not defined by our conflicts of resource, but by our capacity for abstraction. She paused, allowing the deeply philosophical weight of the word to settle. The Cathar, a culture built on rigid hierarchy and empirical observation, struggled with the Terran concept of abstract power. The Krill hegemony is a purely logical threat. Their war is not one of conquest or revenge. It is one of resource optimization. They view all non-Krill life as inefficiently utilizing matter and energy, and therefore an impediment to the cosmos's optimal function. Their strategy is a complex algorithm designed for systemic elimination. Their flaw is not in their power, but in their reliance on pure logic. Counselor Vex, the arch-tactician, now intrigued but still aggressively skeptical, interjected. Logic is the structure of reality, Captain. How can a dependence on logic be a flaw, and how can a species known for its emotional volatility propose a solution to a purely logical problem? Are you suggesting sentiment can defeat mathematics? Rostova turned her head slightly, acknowledging Vex with a calm certainty that bordered on the unnerving. No, Counselor, I am suggesting that metalogic can defeat applied logic. The Krill logic is a closed system. It operates within fixed parameters of known physics, known strategy, and known emotional response. They project their own lack of ethical constraint onto the entire galaxy. They cannot conceive of a strategic decision that is both perfectly logical and perfectly ethical, yet counterintuitive to their core programming. They thought no one would come with the answer, only a desperate attempt to fight the war. Her eyes seemed to hold the cold emptiness of space for a moment. The vanguard of unforeseen logic is not a warship. It is a platform for the projection of a truth the Krill cannot process. The revelation of the ship's function, not as a weapon platform but as a conceptual tool, deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. Lyra, the sector governor, her impatience reaching a peak, leaned forward. Then explain the specifics, Captain. What truth can halt an interstellar advance force of that magnitude? What is the metalogic you propose? What can your single, unarmed vessel do? Her voice betrayed the sheer, desperate magnitude of her people's hope, masked by frustration. Rostova's expression did not change. The specifics, Counselor, involve proprietary Terran applied physics and strategic anthropology. We have analyzed the core algorithm of the Krill aggression, the foundation of their hegemony. It is a system designed to maximize a fixed resource base. Our solution does not attempt to destroy the hegemony. It attempts to redefine the value of the resource base, thus making the conflict itself mathematically unsound, a violation of their core directive. She then made a gesture that was both subtle and overwhelmingly significant. She reached out and tapped a single holographic projection unit that materialized silently on a nearby podium. The projection was not a weapon schematic or a battle map. It was a single, three-dimensional representation of the Krill homeworld system, but overlaid with layers of data that caused a collective gasp among the Cathar technicians. These were not military data points. They were readings of subterranean geological shifts, atmospheric particulate density, and most crucially, a complex oscillating waveform that indicated a profound, structural resonance deep within the planetary crust. This is the core of the Krill flaw, Rostova stated, her voice resonating with an unshakable finality. The Krill hegemony's foundational strength, the massive energy surplus that powers their fleets and their economy, is derived from tapping into a naturally occurring planetary-scale resonance, a massive yet unstable geothermal conduit directly beneath their primary capital world. They have amplified this energy source far beyond its safe yield, a logical choice for maximum efficiency, but an ethical failure due to the long-term risk. She looked up, her gaze now meeting the multitude of stunned faces. Their entire logistical chain is dependent on this energy. If this resonance is neutralized, not destroyed, but stabilized to a non-exploitable level, their entire war machine, from the smallest drone to the largest dreadnought, will instantly lose 86% of its operational capacity, rendering their advanced weaponry inert and their hyperdrive technology unusable. A profound silence descended, heavier and more complete than before. The Cathar technicians were furiously running background calculations on the projected data, their bioluminescent markers blinking rapidly in confirmation. The data, the raw science, was indisputable. The Krill had built a colossal, all-consuming empire on a foundation of geological instability, a risk they had logically dismissed as statistically negligible, an equation the Terrans had solved through the lens of long-term ethical safety and planetary maintenance, a concept utterly foreign to the Krill. Chancellor Catrell, his voice now barely a whisper, a sound of fragile hope and immense dread, asked the key question. To stabilize such a vast resonance from a distance, it is a feat of power beyond the capabilities of even our most advanced planet-taming dreadnoughts. The energy requirement would necessitate the expenditure of an entire stellar core. How can one ship accomplish this without provoking a catastrophic counterstrike, and without causing the very planetary collapse that would condemn billions of Krill civilians? This is where the vanguard of unforeseen logic is unique, Rostova replied, her lips curving in the slightest, most subtle expression that the Cathar xenologists hesitantly categorized as intellectual satisfaction. It is powered by a proprietary Terran system, what we term the null-field singularity drive. It does not consume energy. It manipulates it by temporarily extracting localized matter from the time-space continuum, using the resultant vacuum energy for propulsion and projection, then reinserting the matter without entropy. The physics are complex, but the function is simple. It allows us to generate a focused, counter-resonance wave that can instantaneously and non-violently stabilize the Krill core energy, effectively capping their power source at a safe, pre-industrial level. It is the ultimate humanitarian weapon, a strategy that defeats the aggression without inflicting the required casualty count. The Cathar, a species that valued power projection and defensive fortifications, were struggling to process this. It was an ultimate demonstration of power that lay not in the capacity to destroy, but in the capacity to reorder reality with precision and ethical constraint. It was the epitome of the human species' hidden core, the ability to transcend raw power through complex ethical mathematics. Admiral Rylax, the veteran strategist, now spoke, his voice reverent. A single ship with the power to render an entire galactic war machine inert, and it is offered in the name of a species we dismissed as primitives. Why? Why would your species, unaligned and unthreatened, risk this profound asset to save a collapsing alien empire? What is the Terran gain? Rostova's gaze softened slightly, shifting from analytical to philosophical. The gain, Admiral, is the validation of the ethical imperative. We do not value a conflict-free galaxy because it provides resources. We value it because it allows for the continuation of thought and the preservation of potential. The Krill hegemony, by its very nature, is a cosmic dead end, a singularity of self-referential logic that consumes all possibility. Your fate, the Cathar fate, was a precursor to the fate of all potential life in this sector. Our action is not philanthropy, it is strategic self-preservation of the greatest resource, complexity. And there is another reason, a more pressing one. She paused, her eyes narrowing, the profound, almost unnerving stillness returning, a cold certainty that suggested she was privy to a larger, terrifying truth. The Krill hegemony is a massive, aggressive distraction. We know that a greater structural peril exists, an ancient, non-sentient collapse of cosmic scale that threatens not just this sector, but the very fabric of local reality. We cannot face that threat while simultaneously dealing with a localized, resource-driven war. The war must be ended, not to save you, but to free up the intellectual and physical capital of all advanced civilizations in this area of space. The Vanguard is not a savior. It is an accountant, clearing the galactic ledger of small debts before the arrival of the great, inevitable creditor. The gravity of the final statement settled like a physical weight. The Cathar, focused entirely on the immediate, tangible threat of the Krill, were suddenly confronted with a truth of cosmic scope, a peril so vast it dwarfed their entire existential crisis. The Terran mandate was not engaging in a small-scale rescue. They were executing a critical regional security maneuver on a chessboard the Cathar did not even know exist. The realization of their own species' provincialism, was a more profound psychological shock than the fear of extinction. The Council, in a moment of unprecedented, fearful unity, instantly granted Captain Rostova and the Vanguard full, unrestricted authority. The fate of the Imperium, indeed the fate of a dozen allied species, rested on the single, ethical judgment of one Terran aboard one improbable ship. The journey of the Vanguard of unforeseen logic into the heart of the Krill hegemony space was a ghost transit. The Cathar received sensor relays, terrified and awestruck, showing the Terran vessel moving effortlessly through layers of advanced krill sensor netting and deep space patrols. The krill, incapable of calculating a vector that disregarded known physics, perceived the Vanguard not as a threat, but as a statistical impossibility, a non-event that their systems struggled to categorize. The Terran technology, based on abstract manipulation of the continuum, bypassed the krill's applied, observational technology entirely. Finally, the Vanguard achieved its terminal position, a stable orbit high above the krill capital world, the very heart of the hegemony's colossal energy generation complex. Admiral Rylax, along with Chancellor Catrell, watched the real-time sensor feed from the ascension of stars, their entire command staff held in a state of petrified anticipation. They watched as the single, silent Terran vessel made no move to arm weapons or even to raise an energy shield. A final, calm transmission came from Captain Rostova, routed through the Cathar flagship to the Krill Grand Stratagem, bypassing all encryption as easily as if the signal were a light pulse in open space. Her voice was the same as before, level, professional, and devoid of judgment, but carrying the weight of ultimate authority. To the Krill hegemony, we are the United Terran Stellar Mandate. Your war is over. Your core energy supply is now being capped at an environmentally sustainable, non-exploitable level. This action is irreversible, non-destructive, and entirely logical. You are now free to focus on resource efficiency within your own system, rather than externally projecting a conflict based on resource scarcity. This is a strategic reprioritization, not a surrender. Do not resist the process. The process is now beginning. There was no negotiation, no ultimatum, no threat of force, just a statement of fact, the declaration of a new physical reality. And then the Vanguard acted. A beam of pure, deep violet light, impossibly focused and without a perceptible energy signature, silently emanated from the aft section of the Terran vessel. It did not strike the planet's surface. Instead, it plunged into the deep crust, targeting the exact coordinates of the krill's hyperamplified geothermal resonance. The ensuing event was not an explosion, but an absolute, horrifying silence. On the tactical view screen, the krill capital world suddenly went dim. Not dark, but a deep, immediate drop in all projected energy. No catastrophic power grid failure, but a systematic, smooth, instantaneous deamplification. The colossal energy expenditure that had defined the krill war machine, the constant, furious burn of 1,000,000 starships, simply ceased to exist. In the ensuing moments, the entire krill attack force, the vast, terrifying fleets that had been on the precipice of invading the Cathar core systems, began a slow, agonizing drift. Their advanced hyperdrives went dark, their massive rail cannons fell silent, their internal communication networks sputtering into isolated, frantic signals. The war, the endless, logical, terrifying war, was, in that single, silent moment, over. The mathematical threat had been rendered mathematically obsolete. Admiral Rylax, standing on the bridge of the ascension of stars, felt a profound, primal tremor run through his segmented body, a mixture of disbelief and an almost religious terror. It was not the terror of death, but the terror of the truly unknown, the encounter with a species that had mastered reality on a fundamentally different ethical plane. He watched as the scattered krill vessels, now inert hulks, began to send out disorganized distress calls, not of war, but of confusion and systemic failure. "The war, it is over," he finally whispered, the words sounding alien and impossible on his own vocal nodes. "The most dangerous ship of mankind did not destroy, it silenced." Chancellor Catrell moved to the Admiral's side, his gaze fixed on the single black ship that was now calmly turning on its axis, preparing for a return trajectory. "They have demonstrated a power that makes all our prior conflicts appear as the squabbling of children over stones. They did not conquer the krill. They logically negated the krill's reason for aggression. They provided a solution that did not require a single casualty, a single ethical compromise. The underestimation of the Terrans will be recorded as the greatest strategic failure in Cathar history." In the weeks that followed, the consequences of the Vanguard's action rippled through the sector. The krill hegemony did not collapse. Rather, it was forced into a period of profound, logical restructuring. Deprived of their unsustainable energy source, they had to return to a sustainable internal economy, their external aggression mathematically impossible. The Cathar, liberated from the existential threat, were left with the profound, unsettling reality of their saviors. A new diplomatic conference was convened, not in the desperate synaptic chamber, but in a neutral, Terran-built orbital station, a small, elegant structure that prioritized intellectual exchange over military posturing. The Cathar delegation, led by a now deeply humbled Chancellor Catrell and a transformed Admiral Rylax, sat opposite Captain Rostova. Catrell, his voice steady with a newfound respect, began the discussion. Captain Rostova, the debt owed to your mandate cannot be calculated. You have saved not only our Imperium, but by your ethical intervention, you have saved the Krill from their own self-destructive logic. We seek to understand the nature of this power, not for the purpose of replication, but for the purpose of alliance. What is the fundamental difference between the Terran mandate and all other galactic powers we have encountered? Why is your strategy founded on ethical necessity, not raw capacity? Rostova's expression remained the same, calm, reflective, utterly secure. The difference, Chancellor, is rooted in our history. Your species, the Krill and countless others, evolved in a state of relatively stable, abundant resources, leading to the development of societal structures based on hierarchy, competition, and the projection of power. Humanity, however, evolved on a planet that forced us to face cyclical self-annihilation, overpopulation, resource depletion, ideological warfare. We were forced, through repeated failure and near-extinction events, to evolve a secondary layer of logic, the logic of ultimate consequence. We learned that true power is not the capacity to exert force, but the capacity to remove the need for force. Our most dangerous weapon is not the null-field singularity drive. It is the philosophical depth that allowed us to conceive of it. Admiral Rylax leaned forward, his massive form exuding a tense intellectual energy. Then the vanguard is a statement of that philosophy. But you mentioned a greater peril, a cosmic threat that necessitated this immediate, systemic resolution of our war. You referred to an inevitable creditor. This is the part of the truth that we must now understand, the reason you cleared the galactic ledger. Rostova met his gaze, and for the first time, a subtle shadow of concern crossed her eyes, a faint, almost imperceptible gravity that spoke of burdens far beyond the current sector. The peril is not an empire, Admiral. It is a structural failure in the cosmic architecture, an energy leak on a massive scale that is slowly draining the ambient potential energy of the local supercluster. We detected it over a century ago, an anomaly we traced to a vast, abandoned megastructure on the rim of the Great Void. Not a civilization's creation, but a tool left behind by something that predates organized consciousness. She paused, and the entire chamber waited, breathless, upon the cusp of a revelation that transcended their entire understanding of history. We designated it the Silence Engine. It is a stellar-scale accumulator, designed to harvest the raw, presentient energy of the cosmos, but it has been non-functional for an immense, geological span of time, stuck in a feedback loop that is now, ironically, leaking that energy back into the void. This leakage is accelerating. We calculated that within a few thousand standard cycles, the energy drain will become exponential, resulting in a localized vacuum catastrophe, sterilizing all life in a massive sphere of influence, including our own. She looked from Catrell to Rylax, her expression now one of profound, shared urgency. The Krill War, the Cathar Imperium, these were just localized noise. The vanguard of unforeseen logic was sent here, not as a war-ender, but as a system builder. We needed the Cathar's deep archival historical data on stellar formation, and the Krill's advanced gravitational projection mathematics. We needed a unified, non-warring front of the most intelligent species in this sector. We had to create a coalition of logic and history. A final, vast holographic projection shimmered into existence, dwarfing the simple elegance of the station. It was a projection of the local supercluster, but with a terrifying, red web of energy loss overlaid upon it, all vectors converging on a single, silent point in the deepest void. Our research the reason for the Vanguard's unique capabilities, Rostova concluded, her voice now carrying the resonance of a shared, desperate mission, led us to a singular, ancient signal embedded in the Silence Engine's residual output. It was a final, critical piece of data left behind by the entity that created it, a message of pure mathematical warning. It described a process to shut down the engine's feedback loop, a process that requires the combined intellectual power of multiple, diverse, ethically sound, and newly allied civilizations. It requires the Cathar's deep historical knowledge of this star cluster's evolution, the Krill's sheer capacity for resource management, now ethically constrained, and the Terrans' unique ability to execute a logical solution without ethical compromise. The war was over because we needed the participants to be on the same side of a far greater final conflict. We thought no one would come to the cosmic battle, but now, a unified front, forged not in combat, but in the fire of ethical logic, has been constructed. The true challenge is not to fight the enemy, but to repair the universe. The vanguard of unforeseen logic is merely the key to the next door. Chancellor Catrell stared into the vast, red-webbed projection, his entire conception of galactic reality utterly overturned. The fear of the Krill had been replaced by a terror of cosmic scale, but also by a strange, profound sense of purpose. Humanity, the volatile, chaotic species they had dismissed as insignificant, had provided not just salvation, but a direction, a reason to exist beyond internal struggle. The philosophy of the Cathar Imperium had shifted from survival to guardianship. Then the alliance is not just a necessity, Catrell stated, the words heavy with the weight of the new future. It is the only logical, ethical, and strategically sound path forward. We offer the entirety of the Cathar archival knowledge, our best scientists, our full manufacturing capacity to the execution of this ultimate solution. The Terrans brought a single ship and ended one war. Now, let us begin the final campaign to save all of reality. The universe requires not a fleet of warships, but a single, unified consciousness. We were saved because we were needed. Admiral Rylax, looking at Rostova, saw not a representative of a volatile species, but a silent, terrifying intellect that had mastered not just technology, but the deeper, philosophical logic of survival. The most dangerous ship of mankind had not been dangerous to its enemies, but to the very concept of conflict. It was a vessel designed to forge unity by rendering aggression irrelevant, a perfect expression of humanity's hidden, hard-won wisdom. The silence of the void beckoned, no longer a symbol of the Krill advance, but a vast, silent factory of unknown peril and ultimate purpose. The long journey, the silent struggle to maintain ethical integrity under the pressure of self-destruction, had prepared humanity for this final, vast role. The physician of the cosmos, the logical architect of universal security. The galactic war was over, but the ultimate, most difficult work had just begun. The great, unified endeavor of logic and necessity commenced under the silent, watchful authority of the human mind.